Hello, everyone. Welcome uh, to sliding into the DMs of disability. Thank you for sliding into our DMs. My name is Dan,
And my name is Montana.
and welcome to episode 6, where we will be talking about the ADA, the American with Disabilities Act, and all things kind of connected to it. Before we jump in, I just want to apologize. I have a very hoarse voice right now. I'm a little under the weather, but we're going to try and power through and have a pretty good conversation. So I will pass this along to Montana to start. And the ADA as a whole, the American with Disabilities Act, we are now
Awesome.
34 years into having it passed. And now, as a young adult that has never had a life outside of the ADA, how have you seen it benefit you throughout your life? Or, like, what are some important standout things that you think are what make the ADA so vital and so important in our lives?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for me, I didn't really know much about the ADA until probably like a year or so ago. Like we all know, I got diagnosed later on as a teen with my rare disease and then had other chronic illnesses later on in my life. But with me being in a workplace now, it is super helpful having the ADA in place just so that I have the comfort and well-being of knowing like, hey, I have this and I am protected with the American with a disability. And basically the American Disability Act, like you were saying, it was in 1990 when it was first started, which is crazy to think about. It was like 10 years before I was born. So kudos to those people making it even possible. And it's a federal civil rights law that prohibits discrimination against people with disabilities in everyday activities. So it allows us another layer of protection when we go to work and have a disability. If that's a invisible disability or just any type of disability, it protects us through that. And what I found super helpful is we all don't know what it entails really. It took me asking questions to Dan and other people in my community to learn a little bit more about what does it entail? Is it going to hurt me? What is the benefit of it? And from being an advocate, I found it super helpful because, like I said, it's another tool in my back pocket, and it allows me to have that peace of mind and that freedom to know, hey, I can't get fired due to this. There's a law in place saying I cannot be discriminated due to my disability. I have these accommodations in place, and this protects me. So that's probably like the long version of why I feel like the ADA has helped me significantly, especially in the new phase of doing it, because I haven't done it with any other companies until the company I'm at now. But it was super helpful just learning a little bit more about it and understanding like, hey, this is not a bad thing. It's actually going to help. And I've also realized that the accommodation like can change. Like your ADA accommodations, it's not one size fits all. It can change depending on where you are in your season of life. And I think continuing that conversation with your manager, with your HR team to be like, hey, this is what was going well, we should continue discussing it every 3 to 6 months or whatever timeline you feel comfortable. Um, but yeah, that's my long story short version. But what about you, Dan? What have you noticed it like helping or thriving in your life with you having it your whole life?
Yeah, so before I dive into that, I wanted to first really highlight 2 points that you made, and it's the first one of just the people that had to fight to get to where we were. Um, People prior to 1990 did not have the rights or the recognition that we did, and there's been so much buildup over generations and generations, and that battle that they fought to preserve or to ensure our rights, and now that we have to use to preserve it is so vital. And I always remember the most important and most memorable moment of what finally swayed a lot of public opinion was the Capitol crawl, where so many uh, disabled advocates, patients, left their mobility aids, wheelchairs, and just crawled up the steps of the Capitol and showed just how inaccessible our world is. Um, and it always stuck with me. It's a fact that we had to fight for that. Um, it is always disheartening that it ever got to that state, but now we're here and we just can't be satisfied with that. And I think
Mm.
for me, living my whole life with it, it's been a very good privilege. I've been able to have accessibility, meet my needs. I've been able to never have issues with getting into buildings. I've never had issues with having to sit out of certain things because of my disability or be given a different accessible way to participate. Um, it's been really hard throughout my life because there are times where it doesn't feel comfortable explaining it, but that's kind of the beauty of the ADA either. I don't have to out myself if I don't want to. Um, and when I do, it's on my timeline and my choice and when I want my accessibility. So I think that's something that's important to always highlight too, is that if you're someone with more of an invisible disability, um, you can disclose whenever you want. There's whether that's to a friend, whether that's to an employer, whether that's to a teacher, professor, whatever have you. It is your right in your timeline to disclose that, and no one can out you in that way. And then also when you are ready and you need that accessibility, there's the reasonable accommodations, which I think are the any like company, any school, they have to work with you and try to find a reasonable accommodation. And sometimes you could suggest something and there could be that conversation. Maybe there's something in the middle, but there has to be that try to give you that resource that you rightly deserve.
Yeah, 100%. And I really like the point that you were making about it's your right to disclose. I know I've connected with a friend of mine who has something similar to like what I have, and they have always been willing to disclose and do like ADA. For me, it took a little bit longer for me to understand, oh, these are like my rights. I'm allowed to have this. I am protected. And it's always great, like hearing from another perspective on what they did and what was helpful for them. And they disclosed before the interview process. So like just want to highlight to what you were saying, like you have the right to disclose when and how you want it. Let's say if it's for a job, you can disclose it through the interview process if you see fit. However, if it's like later on in a few months later, if you feel comfortable with your manager and disclose it then, that's your right. It's your timeline and what works best for you, and no one can like push you on when you feel like it's right to disclose. For me, it took a little bit while longer for me to finally like comprehend and fully embody and understand like, okay, yes, this is chronic, it's not going anywhere. Let me at least have systems in place so if something does happen, I will be protected. So just wanted to highlight again with what you were saying, like you have the right to disclose whenever you see fit, and you have the right to disclose as much as you want. You can just say, have a chronic illness. You never have to specify what that is. You don't have to pour your life story out if that's not comfortable for you, and that's completely okay. It's however it makes you feel um to thrive in like your daily life.
Yeah. And I think that's something that really benefits disabled people because there was such a fear of ever, or sorry, there was always such a fear if you disclosed, you would be discriminated against, you would be harassed, potentially institutionalized even earlier. Um, and now there's that no pressure of you have a right to disclose and you can't face retribution because you disclosed. And that's a tough part too. Like if there will still be people out there that will do uh bad things and in bad faith and say that they were trying to make a reasonable accommodation when they weren't, or you didn't get hired and in reality the only reason you weren't is because you disclosed that you had a disability. So it's really hard that we still have to face those prejudices. and that they still do exist, and people will try and skirt and loophole their way around the ADA.
Hmm.
But that what's always important is that you have rights, and that at the end of the day, your rights supersede their inconvenience. And whether it's a way that you could expose them, bring forward this light of harassment, there's a lot of ways that you can still make a difference and still show that you deserve a place. Because one of the other important things is that we, as an American society, have said that separate is not equal. We've that went against that in Brown v. Board of Education. We've shown that that's something that's not equitable. But for disabled people, there's still that mindset of, oh, they could be in this other place, like this separate classroom, or in a different location, or they'll do this other activity or something. And that's not a reasonable accommodation. That's not ADA compliant. You have to be able to try
Hmm.
in the best way possible to integrate and incorporate all disabled people so that they can participate in the activity or the class or the work. Um, so I think that's just another thing to always be aware is that sometimes people may think that you're being ADA accessible because, oh, they added this separate thing, but that's the furthest thing from the truth.
Yeah. One thing that came up when you were speaking is during Rare Disease Week, I was able to connect with someone and we were talking about ADA accessibility. Because with me having invisible illness, I feel like it's been sometimes hard to like share my voice and just be like, hey, yeah, like I'm not having a great day. Like I need like additional support if that's like in my friend life or anything typical. But we're just talking about accessibility and then we got down to the ADA and all like that. And one thing they said that really has resonated with me um, is ADA is the bare minimum someone should do. And that has just stuck out with me. Like the ADA is great to have. It's protects our laws, um, and prohibits discrimination for people with disabilities and their activities. But when they said the is ADA compliance is bare minimum to contribute, it just blew my mind being like, wow. Some people use it as a checkbox. So I would love to pivot to you and see if you have ever heard someone say something similar to this and what resonated with you when someone said something like this, or with if this is the first time you ever heard this before, what are your thoughts with it? Because I remember I was just completely baffled and be like, okay, we still have a lot more work to do to
Yeah.
continue this positive movement forward. Yes, it's amazing that we have the ADA, but what else can we continue to do to have those accommodations, to have our rights, and etc.
Yeah, and I think I always look to the quote by the wonderful Judy Human. She said, if I'm satisfied with a handicapped bathroom, then I have failed as a disabled person. I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but it's basically this idea of like we cannot grow complacent as disabled people that just because this passed, that means that it's over, that we won. And it's that idea too that unfortunately a lot of companies, a lot of schools still have this belief of just, oh, we added an elevator, we made a ramp, we did the bare minimum. Um, we brought in this disabled employee. Look at us, we're so progressive. And in reality, like, if you're just doing
Yeah.
it for quotas or to meet the law, that's not making a difference. It's just that you are doing the bare minimum to be compliant and having like a quota system. Oh, our token disabled person, that's honestly more ableist than not hiring anyone because it's that idea of you're just seeing us as, oh, we just need to get this person here. We don't really value them. We don't really care about them. We see them as this subhuman person.
Mhm.
And that goes for any, like, the one thing about disabled people and all marginalized groups. It's so interconnected because that sentence could be said with anyone, whether that's a Black American, whether it's a transgender individual. Um, it's this idea of like we're gonna do the bare minimum, finish our check marks, prop that employee up, saying, "Look at how progressive we are, look how good we're doing." And in reality, you don't actually care about the work that you're doing or how to make your employees better. And if they are to
Mhm.
step out of a line, you're ready to just get rid of them and see them as expendable. We need to also follow through with the beliefs, with the necessities of these different bills and how these anti-discrimination uh, bills are put forth is to ensure equity and to ensure equal opportunity instead of having just a quota system where you're checking the check marks and propping yourself up as progressive when you're not.
Yeah. When you were talking about that with just having the check marks and saying like you're progressive, I kept getting the image in my head of the pat on the back for just doing, like you were saying, the minimum, when you need to like keep moving forward and be progressive. Um, so how can we continue this movement forward? We have the ADA, which is great, but what are some other forward movement progression that we can do as advocates or even just as individuals, to make the workplace or even home life or friends, just more inclusive?
Yeah. And I think it's something like having conversations like this. You need to be able to share our experiences. We need to be able to share the importance of why these things mean to us and what they stand for, not just in the written law, but for us and how it's impacted our lives, how it's made it better, and what we need to continue doing to make it better, whether that's through societal changes in beliefs towards disabled people, whether it's legislation that can make it easier for disabled people to get the care that they need, or for companies or anything to be able to make themselves, excuse me, more accessible in a quicker timeline. I think it's one of those things where the more that we're allowed, the more that we are making ourselves present, the more that we are going to see change. And we need to not give that up because if we grow complacent and satisfied with where we are, or if we're not letting our voice be heard, then it's going to start backsliding. And we don't want to have that issue. We had that with Section 504 where we lost our rights and we needed to fight again to get the ADA and know our goal as disabled people is to make the next generation of disabled people have an easier life. And it's going to continue doing that generation after generation. Like, I'm excited. I know I won't be around, but 5, 6 generations from now, how disabled people would be treated.
Yes, go off. Man, I wish we'll be around for 5 to 6 generations to just see how far we have progressed. Um, and yeah, I think definitely having these conversations, with your friends, with your family, with anyone really, about like where you're at and why the ADA is important to you, as well as why it's just important in general. I feel like a lot of people don't know. I know I personally did not know this much, but I feel like a lot of people forget how many people have a disability. They're like, oh, this is not going to like happen to me. Is they make excuses like that. But I have been researching a little bit, for this podcast as well as a passion project I'm working on. And I was completely baffled to hear that there's a 2022 study that there was 1 billion people with a disability. That's around 1 in 7 people. But in 2023, it increased 1.3 billion. So that became 1 in 6 people with a disability. However, if we look into America, we there's 1 in 4 people with a chronic illness of some sort. So if you think about it, probably like 1 in 4, 1 in 5 people that you meet, they have a disability where they're going through something very similar. And I feel like our society does not really shine a light on that of, hey, this is rising. Like from 2022 to 2023, it rose 300,000 people. And I keep reading articles about how autoimmune disease and chronic illnesses are on a rise in America, especially. But you're not seeing a lot of people talk about ADA or how to make the workplace more accommodating. So I would love to know from you if there's any easy accommodations that remote work or just any work can provide for people with disability or for people who later on get a disability.
Yeah. And I really loved what you had said with the statistics because it's always that if disabled people all lived in one country, we'd be the third most populated country in the world if every disabled person lived in the same country. And
Wow.
yeah, it's always crazy and mind-boggling to hear that. But yeah, when it comes to accessibility and the ADA and the reasonable accommodations, remote work is one of the most popular ones. It's definitely been a lot more accepted due to COVID. And I think a lot more companies are moving towards, at the very least, a hybrid system.
Mhm.
Um, and that's something that could, if it doesn't interfere with the work, um, because as much as like the social aspect of work is a part of it, I don't think it's as important as the ability to, actually be able to perform your job tasks, being able to get paid and your fair wage.
Mhm.
So remote work is definitely that accessible option, if which is another issue that the ADA faces, is that buildings built pre 1975 do not have to become disability compliant. Or if there's certain nonprofits, unless it's like a federal building or taking federal money, it's built pre 1975, it doesn't have to make the accommodations. So if these are the like types of scenarios, then yeah, it could definitely be a reasonable accommodation. Um, and I think that's just something that it's always a conversation to have. You can say what your needs are. Maybe it is remote, maybe you need to be in the office. And it's just like an in-person job. And having these conversations with your employers, what can we do? How can we make this work? What are some things that I need? What are some things that they just need to be able to know that they can help support you? Um, and I think it's always hard to share what you need, but if you don't share what you need, you're never gonna get the help that you deserve. And unfortunately, people aren't mind readers. People don't know what you're struggling with. So,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
but yeah,
100% about sharing what you need. It can be difficult. Trust me, I know. Been there, still kind of through the process a little bit. It can be a little uncomfortable, but it's important to raise your voice and just expressing, hey, this is what's going on. Something's changing. I would like to discuss this to help me with this, you know? Um, but yeah, that's definitely good to know about the most rising accommodation is remote work. I don't usually think that because I have worked remotely the last two jobs I've had. So I feel like just been accustomed to remote work the last 3 to 4 years with my career. And I guess that can sometimes get me distracted on how lucky I am to have remote work. Not even as an accommodation per se, because we all work remote with my company, but just having that as one less thing I have to stress on. And then the extra cherry on top is having the ADA um, act in place so I can get the accommodations that I need. I'm trying to think if there's like other like accommodations that would be beneficial for us to touch on because I know personally I've done some research on um, oh my gosh, I just blanked on it, but I was doing research on it. It's the right now I have an accessibility tool for work that I use that speaks back to me, but I want to get a screen reader. Okay, cool. I just blinked on that for like 2 hot seconds. Um, but I was hoping to get a screen reader so I don't have to keep highlighting everything or having to like have a command thing. But I feel like using the accessibility tools, there's a lot that we don't know about, especially on our computers. But people don't teach you about it. So I would love to know if you think it would be beneficial for more people, especially in the remote environment or hybrid environment, to do more of a deep dive on these accessibility tools that we already have on our fingertips, but we don't really talk about much. Because I didn't know I had this until my tech guy told me. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, great.
Yeah. And I think it's one thing that with it's hard because a majority of able-bodied people are not going to know the resources that a disabled person would need.
Mhm.
So it unfortunately a lot of the onus in terms of us saying what we need comes down to us. So doing a lot of research, whether it's a screen reader, whether it's something else, if you're able to show your employers or college or whatever have you, this is a resource that I need that will benefit me, benefit this company, benefit my ability to perform the tasks, ability to finish my essay or whatever. Um, then yeah, being able to present it and saying that this is a reasonable accommodation, and yeah, it'll cost some money, but in the long run, you're investing in me, and I'm gonna be the best damn employee that I'll ever be, especially with this. Then it's a very reasonable accommodation, whether it's a screen reader or another type of accommodation that you've done research on to find that can boost your productivity or boost your comfortability with the role.
Yeah. Another thing I wanted to talk a little bit more on is I know personally for me, when I was going through the accommodation process, I knew specifically a few things I wanted to put in like my accommodations, but the other stuff I was unsure about because it was just having it in place for serious scenarios because last year I kept getting like pretty bad infections that I would end up in like the hospital. And that was very unexpected. And I'm like, oh gosh, what happens if this happens again? So since then, I had like the wake up call of like, wow, I really need to get something set in place. So if I do get sick like this again, like I won't have anything to worry about. Like I will have everything set in place. But I have found it helpful after like connecting with like HR, because HR is great, but they can only provide so much, especially if they are also able-bodied. They can't specifically give you an accommodation because they don't know what you're going through. They can discuss it with you and talk about the options. But one thing I have noted that has been helpful for my research, of course, I use Google, but I also connected with like my acupuncturist, my specialist, other doctors, other people I'm really close to, just being like, okay, what would make my life easier and like where to go from there. It was difficult for people to like figure out what a reasonable accommodation is, especially if we're waiting for the aha moment of not just everyday life, but the worst case scenario of me being hospitalized and me being weak for weeks at a time. So I had to basically just research, okay, where are my accommodations for where I am right now? But also, worst comes to worst, what that may look like, but also have a very broad base surrounding it, saying this may change. And I think that's super important to notice because illnesses can change, you can change. So accommodation that worked for you a year ago may not be where you're at now. You may be so much like healthier with where you're at with medications or all this. So I think it's important to utilize the resources that we have of Google as well as our community, but also our specialists and doctors. They can provide some type of clarity and support on what should I request when
Yeah.
this happens again to me.
For as
Um,
much as we have a lot of issues with how doctors treat disabled people. They can be a very good ally in terms of saying what we do actually need as well. And they could be a voice that an able bodied person would be more inclined to listen to. And it's something that it's difficult that they don't want to believe in us, particularly,
Mhm.
and they may want that reassurance. Um, but it is a reality that we need to be crafty. We need to use our resources to the best of our ability. And to touch on that as well, like with the dynamic aspect of a lot of disabilities, there'll be times where the reasonable accommodation that we had, we no longer need and we're fine. But also letting our employer know that it may come back or what I may need in a few months might change, whether we go back to the reasonable accommodation or now my disability is changing again and I need this accommodation now. So I think just continuing to have that steady stream of communication is really vital.
Yes, 100%. And oh goodness, what you were saying about like doctors and just overall people. Yeah, yeah. I'm I 100% resonate with that. Um, and it's also okay to acknowledge that you're not going to figure it out all at once. I know for me, when I first started the process, I was very overwhelmed and I did not feel as supported as like I hoped I would have in the process. Um, but overall, we know ourselves best. We're our best doctors or our best advocates or whatever the term is. I'm blanking on that as well. But we're our own best advocates. So it's okay to take time away and figure out what makes the most sense for us with accommodations, with the ADA, with how we want to move forward. And it's also okay to give ourselves grace through this process too. I know I really wanted to figure everything out in like one meeting. That did not happen for me at all. And I understand through where I'm at with my health journey, I'm likely going to have to change my accommodations a little bit more. And that's okay too. So just want to also reiterate like it's fine if you're overwhelmed a little bit through this process. I had it and that was normal, but you do have the support and the resources available for you to get through this. And we all are still going to be advocating and wanting the best for each and every one of you to get the accessibility and the accommodations that you need to be your best self, not only with work, but school, with life, with anything that you choose to do.
Yeah. And I think that if you ever have any questions before you dive deep into um going into employment or the ADA and knowing your rights and you want to talk to a disabled person, you could always reach out to Montana or I.
Yes.
We could also put you in touch with people who are also professionals within this field or are very knowledgeable. So that way you can feel the most comfortable and the most support that you can possibly have. We're
Yeah.
running a little short on time. But and my voice is about to go. But I think that this conversation is so vital and the ADA is it's not the answer. It's the most one of the most, if not the most important thing to ever happen in the disabled community, but it should never be just that. We can't just use it as our idol that we worship. We need to continue strengthening it. We need to continue fighting for other bills concerning disability rights, whether it's in
Preach.
the healthcare or insurance or and we need to continue changing the public perception and continue to educate us, the able-bodied people, that we are people that are human, that exist, that just want rights and the ability to do what we love in the best way possible.
Oh my goodness, I cannot say that better. Preach, Dan, preach. Yes, 1,000%. And always, if any questions have come up, or like Dan was saying, that you would want to talk about it more into deep dive, please feel free to reach out to us. And we also, like he was saying, we have resources available that were so helpful. I know for me personally, for my journey through this process, and we can change the world, I believe. I'm being optimistic here again in this episode, but we can make these positive movements changing forward. But it takes one voice, one action, and multiple other people through it to happen. Um, and this concludes this episode for sliding into the DMs with Dan and Montana. And please like, subscribe, follow, send all this to your friends, your mom, dad, whoever you hang out with. We would greatly appreciate it. And I'm going to pass it back to Dan before his voice goes. Is there anything I'm missing here?
Yeah, don't forget to like and subscribe as Montana said. You can follow Disability Rewritten on Instagram. We also have a Patreon. Um, and yeah, thank you for supporting our channel, and we hope to see you in the next episode.
Yes, I hope everyone has a fantastic night and thank you all so much for supporting us. And we will be back for episode 7, which we will decide in the next week regarding what that is. So stay tuned and be surprised.
Have a great day, everyone. Thank you for watching.
Thank you. Bye.